Good afternoon, everyone. Steve should be on any moment now. I'll throw the agenda in the chat in just a second.
Yeah, I haven't started yet. I'm logged in.
You're also not on mute.
Someone,
Sorry, guys.
Sally, I know you have Steve's cell phone number. Would you mind checking in with him?
Will do.
Thank you. I should get that in my phone.
Apologies.
Nicole, is Steve with you? Okay, yes. I'm wondering if they're having technical difficulties. That's fine, Tony. Oh, I see an Armstrong. Oh no. There we go. Hello, Steve.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. We've got about 15 people on here. So I think whenever you're settled.
All right, we're ready to go, Cindy. You're all set?
Yeah, I threw the agenda in the chat, but I'll throw it in there again. And I think we're good to go.
Great. Good afternoon, folks, and thank you for attending a meeting of the America 250 in Connecticut Education Subcommittee. As you know, this is the committee that will be overseeing or planning or helping to publicize events. And first thing I'd like to do is introduce the committee's new co-chair. And this is Bilal Sakau from Bilal. You say a few words. Give us a couple words of wisdom here.
Words of wisdom. Bilal Siku. I teach at the University of Hartford, and looking forward to working with this group. To put together some really great ideas for the 250th anniversary coming up. And so I feel like I've introduced myself at the very beginning of the process, but I mean, that's about it. So, and thanks a lot.
Thanks. And if everyone else could just very briefly introduce yourself, Tracy.
I'm Tracy Wilson. I'm a retired high school history teacher and the town historian in West Hartford.
Thank you. Nicole.
Nicole, you're muted.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Jones, and I am the Humanities and Arts Project Manager at the CSDE in the academic office.
Thank you. Matt, excuse me, Matt W. How about that?
I am not Matt Farley, and I don't play him on TV. I'm Matt Warshire. I'm a professor at CCSU. Nice to see everybody.
And Matt F.
Yeah, I'm going to lean into my other Matt role as last time. So Matt Farley, I'm with Campus Compact. We're a national coalition of college universities committed to civic engagement.
Sally?
I'm Sally Whipple at the Connecticut Democracy Center at Connecticut's Old State House.
Allison?
Hey, everybody. I'm Allison Norrie. I'm a teacher for the Fairfield Public Schools, and I'm the president for the Association of Study of Connecticut History.
Thank you. Kathy?
Kathy Hermes, publisher of Connecticut Explored, have an office next to Matt W.
Sorry, Kathy.
You drew the short straw there, huh? Tony.
Hi, folks. Tony Roy, President, Connecticut Council for the Social Studies, also a high school history teacher at Global Experience Magnet School in Bloomfield. Apologies for my camera not working on my school computer today, but I'm happy to be here.
Jenny.
Hi, I'm Jenny Hikula Diaz, or JHD. I use they and she pronouns, and I'm the professional learning coordinator at the Connecticut Council for the Social Studies.
Thanks. Liz?
Yeah, I'm Liz Devine. My camera is a little glitchy, so that's why it's not on. Retired high school teacher at Hall High School.
Thank you. Our representative from Stepping Stones.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry. This is Ramona Revere. I'm having a little bit of an issue with my camera this evening, so I apologize. But we are here to understand how what role the museum can take in supporting the efforts for America 250. We are based in Norwalk, and we are a children's museum. We will be having an exhibit that opens up called Healthyville in 2025 that we will use to help promote America 250. So we are here to learn what things the committee is doing, and then what is our role in that work as well.
And Fiona.
I'm Fiona Vernal. Sorry, I'm commuting. I can't be on camera. From History and Africana Studies at the University of Connecticut. Hello, everybody.
Thank you, Fiona. And Robert?
So Ramona kind of said everything. I'm Robert Townsend, the Director of External Affairs at Stepping Stones Museum for Children. And so Ramona basically explained why the museum has an interest, and we look forward to supporting in any way we can.
Robert, I don't know how is it we get your picture when we get nothing from her, but that's an internal issue, I'm sure. But thank you. First thing I'd like to do, Sam from the Mohegan Tribe and Sally and I went to a conference this weekend in Williamsburg that was partially representatives from different 250 organizations from around the state. And Sally, would you just tell folks a little about what we learned or heard or whatever from that adventure?
Sure, I can tell you a couple of things about it. First of all, it was called Contested Freedoms, and it was a conference that was put together by the Omohundro Institute, Colonial Williamsburg, and William and Mary. So they had several different strands going on, but a big focus was on museums and educators. So museums and schools working together. There were many very different and interesting sessions. Some were very scholarly focused, and some were more about how to work with teachers, how to develop teacher leaders. But I would just make a couple of comments about it, I guess. One of the things that was very interesting was a session that Steve and I went to on what scholars want the public to know about the Revolutionary War. And that was a very rich and interesting session with questions at the end from members of the public, other scholars, and educators. And one of the things that came out was they were talking about the complexities of the Revolutionary War and thinking about it as a civil war rather than a Revolutionary War, thinking about it as familial connections among people on the British side, people on the American side, thinking about it in very complex ways, as one should think of history. And then Becky Martin, who some of you may have known, she worked in Connecticut a while ago, but she was there as a museum consultant, and she referenced Susie Wilkening's research. And one part of that research was that when historians say something is complex, the public hears, "You don't think I'm smart enough to understand that." So there needs to be a different way to get the message across to the public about the complexity of what we're looking at. So I thought that was really helpful. There was also discussion in a few of the sessions about what is America 250? Is it a celebration? Is it a reflection? Is it a commemoration? And how are people thinking about it? How should people perhaps think about it? And what role do scholars play in helping people think about it? And that was something, we went to a couple of sessions that were just for commissioners, and the only commissions represented were Connecticut, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Virginia. And I believe in the whole conference, Steve, Sam, and I were probably the only people from north of the Mason-Dixon line at that whole conference. And it was very interesting to hear some people talking about how this should be a celebration, that in school you should only be teaching students the most positive things about the revolution, how it started, its outcomes, and or you should at least just start with that stuff, and then you can tell them more of the real truth as you go along. There was an emphasis on interwoven stories and making sure that people understand that history is made up of individuals whose stories are woven together, but follow and create the larger national thread of our national history. And there was some talk about people who are states that aren't among the 13 colonies, and how if we think there's not a lot known about the 250th in the 13 original colonies, people beyond that just don't really care about it that much at all, or they're starting to care about it, but they don't know quite how they can align themselves with the idea of a 250th celebration, commemoration, reflection, or as a few people put it, denigration. So it was, there are a lot of different thoughts out there about it, and we found it was a super valuable conference to go to. And I'm still sort of processing what I heard and learned and thought as I went through that. And Steve, you might want to correct or add to some of the things that I just mentioned.
Yeah, by the way, a few folks there were talking about it. There's some states that are, and Cindy, you may know this as well or not know, or you may be able to add some insights, that are doing very little, if anything, with this. There, as somebody pointed out, what's the validity of America 250 to somebody in Hawaii or something like that? So who's going to be involved? I tried in a couple of our sessions with the other states to say, do you think this will get political? How do we handle this? And this had no interest in them. They did not even look at it from that angle. And it was interesting, the teacher, the high school teacher, who during the session on what scholars want people to know about the revolution, the high school says, well, basically said, well, can't we just teach this as like a happy thing, as a celebratory thing? One professor very delicately said, you know, there's a research thing that you may want to look at that you may never have heard of, but it may be helpful to you. There's something called the 1619 Project. And the teacher's dutifully writing it down in her notebook. So that was an interesting exchange. I would say that just on the organizational way, listening to the folks from those other states, that we're not in a if you think we're behind or something, we're not in a bad spot. I mean, Kentucky just hired a young woman that's probably 25 years old, and she's being put in charge of doing the America 250 in Kentucky. So I don't think we're in bad shape considering the other. Next item, we have to approve, and I'm certainly not above debating if necessary, but we have to approve our action plan, which Cindy, everybody has, right, in the chat. It was part of the agenda.
Correct. So in the chat, there's a link to the agenda, which has the goals for the subcommittee.
So that's, Bilal and I have looked at these ourselves and crafted these ourselves, but we're certainly not opposed to changes or discussion. So anybody have anything that they'd like to add, subtract, or anything? These would be obviously a document that would guide the work of the subcommittee for all the way up till 2026. Yeah, Bill, please.
Actually, it's more of a question going back to the conference, and which really sounds interesting. I mean, the idea that some states maybe not doing much, the idea, of course, the Southern states are weaving together their own narrative about the founding of the country and the Revolutionary War. I'm just sort of, wondering about how people were sort of talking outside of perhaps even the actual presentations about the way they're looking at this, the way people in the states that they're representing may feel about this. It just sort of strikes me as you just really threw out something really like profound in terms of the idea that some states are like, not much interest, other states wanting celebration. I don't know. I'm just sort of interested in hearing more about what were some of those side conversations people may have had over lunch and conversations they're hearing from people in their own states. And again, if it takes us too off track, that's fine. But it's just, I'm curious about what was your sort of impression beyond that, but beyond just the sessions themselves, but just talking to people who were there.
Sally, you want to comment?
I would just say that they had this whole thing pretty much scheduled from 8 in the morning till 8 at night. So there was not a lot of time for outside conversations, but they did set up sort of a Zoom chat where people can continue to communicate about that and invite other people into it. And I don't know, Steve, did you have any conversations with people that gave you more insights into what they were thinking and doing?
A couple folks, they're deeply wrestling with that issue that you mentioned. Should this be celebratory? Should it be reflective? Or should it be not celebratory at all? I mean, I think those are debates that are going on in a few states. I could just say, by the way, as a sidelight, William and Mary, where this was hosted, is attempting to reconcile itself as a university with the quote unquote local community. And I think they're relatively happy with where it's gone. But they had a session that we attended that some community members attended. And Sally, would you say that the reconciliation process is not complete? Would that be a fair statement?
I would say that was an excellent session on the voices of descendants. And it was very interesting because it wasn't really going back to colonial Williamsburg times. And it was really looking at more recent times and how people who lived in the Williamsburg community felt they had been treated by colonial Williamsburg since its founding. Is that a good description, Steve?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of being displaced from their land, working at Williamsburg, yet not earning a living that would enable them to live in Williamsburg. So the stories weren't surprising, but they were really heartfelt. And I thought that there was a very good lesson there for us, for all of us to really keep, and I know that we are talking about keeping everybody's stories present and at the forefront, but that piece of that conference to me was the most touching. And that was, as I said, there were different strands, and that strand covered the Bray School in Williamsburg, a historic school that was founded in 1740 for free and enslaved African American children. And they are preserving that school, but they have done a lot of work in the community to talk about that school and what it meant and bringing it forward to what's happening in schools today in and around Williamsburg. A lot of these sessions were videotaped, and I'm trying to find out if we can get and share those tapes, because there were just such rich discussions there that I think would inform and support a lot of what we're talking about.
I'll keep an eye out. I know the Virginia 250th website shared all of the recordings from their last conference back in March. So it might be there in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it might be useful to all of us to be able to, to the extent we're able to collect some of the stuff that people are doing in other states to get a sense of what that looks like. I mean, it just strikes me from listening to this conversation that these are issues we need to be particularly sensitive to, especially as we transition to the next discussion on the agenda, because it strikes me of the importance to make sure we are as inclusive as possible in terms of how we construct this, and that we are bringing a wide range of voices. This is a different country from the 1976 celebration. Very different country, and lots of voices have risen to the surface in a way that weren't as present back then. And I think it really can potentially affect how this lands for a lot of people. And it's something to be really, particularly sensitive about.
Yeah. I really love that. And I would like to add one more thing, which is that one of the keynotes was Ned Blackhawk, who spoke at the Old State House for ASH 2 weeks ago on his new book. And so he's really talking about how the beginnings of the Revolutionary War were, right around the time of the Treaty of Paris and the settlers and vigilante settlers. And so other questions that arose during some of the conversations was, when did the revolution start and when did it end? And those are really big questions. And they are going to be things that most people in the public aren't going to think about them, because to them it started with a shot heard around the world. So if you look at the Alejandro Institute's YouTube channel, they have tons and tons of really great videos with scholars talking about these issues. And I think they're really helpful as we're thinking about our history and how to make sure it's inclusive and it's complete. There are just so many good resources, as everybody knows, but I found those particularly useful.
An interesting session that I went to, Tracy, I'll just, one sec, apologies. A session I went to, very interestingly, the people, three of them were historians of the Caribbean. And they are worried, quite frankly. Their worry is that everyone's going to fit in Caribbean studies, Haiti, into the context of the American Revolution. And does that really aid the study of Caribbean studies if more and more people are simply looking at that through the lens of the revolution? That was a worry that those scholars expressed in that session. Tracy, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. This is so interesting. I'm just wondering if there's a connection between this committee and I'm imagining there's a committee of local historical societies. Is there? I mean, is there a message that's going to be built up in the schools, and then these local historical societies are going to have celebrations, like a, you know, there's going to be a dissonance there, and how did that? I mean, I think there's something in here about public, about historical societies. I'm not sure. I just read through it once quickly, but how does what happens in the schools make its way into the community? Or is that not a part of our purview?
Cindy, would you want to talk to that first?
Yeah, I'm happy to start answering that question. I think there's definitely room for conversation. There is an engagement committee that will be sharing the work of the commission with partner organizations, with a network of local contacts that Denise has been working on in each of the towns. And so the work of the education and of the other subcommittees will be shared via that network in a variety of different ways. There's no direct historical society network necessarily or subcommittee. Amherst Williams, who is the head of the Connecticut League of History Organizations, which is now the Connecticut League of Museums, is a member of the commission. So she is using that platform to share a lot of information with organizations across the state. But there's going to have to be a lot of encouraging people across the board to speak with one another, because we can't be in every single community connecting every historical society with every school. So we'll be amplifying the messaging from this subcommittee, and we'll be encouraging historical societies to look to the commission's themes as they develop their programming. But there's a lot of work to continue doing.
And Matt, just one tiny second, I'll be right with you. I can't imagine that we could be creating work for K-12 and that's where education stops. I mean, I can't perceive that, because I think we have to move a little beyond that, I think. Matt, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Allison Nori, who is our favorite friend teacher and also the president of the Association for the Study of Connecticut History, and I have been talking about exactly this thing. And so if you remember, after our last meeting, I sent everyone a draft proposal of the conference that we're putting together at CCSU for this March. And we decided that it makes a lot of sense, if we're already going to be setting up the room and doing all these things, that we actually add a fourth day to that conference, where we host at CCSU the spring ASH conference, and we bring all of these many local historical societies together and give them the opportunity to not only hear from Steve and others who are on the commission to think about what those conference themes are, but to also talk about the kinds of stories and groups that they would like to connect with in their own communities, and so that they can bounce ideas off of each other. And so I think that is actually going to end up being very fruitful.
And Matt, if I can just tack onto that, it may not end up looking like a traditional conference as we first see it. It could be sort of a community building, partner building day, almost like an open house. We're still kind of, playing around with it. So if anybody has any ideas of what might be useful for community partners and wants to reach out to us, we'd be very grateful, because we're still in the planning stages for that.
And the best part of that is we have funding, we have outside funding for that conference. So anybody who wants to go to it, any organization that wants to go to it, anybody that wants to go to that conference, we're going to be able to support them for that. So we have an outside grant funder, an individual who's going to support that entire conference, which is super cool.
I think about 15 minutes ago, I was trying to get people to see if they'd approve our steps, but we got a little. Bilal, you messed us up on that. You asked a question, but that's okay. I mean, that's cool. But are there additions or deletions, or do you like the spirit of the thing? I know a mission statement sometimes means little, but I think we have to have one, and we're just wondering if this is appropriate. Is there wording there that's inappropriate? Is there wording that should be added?
It seems like there's two at the end that are really similar. Multiple perspectives must be included, and then it's critical that all perspectives be considered.
Good pickup.
They look like they're basically saying the same thing. Am I missing something?
We could fix it. We could fix that part. Yes.
Can I chime in there about maybe what's meant by perspectives? Because when you brought up earlier the thing about Hawaii, my mind went to the fact that the Continental Congress supported the voyages of Captain Cook, which directly connects to Hawaii. And John Ledyard from Connecticut went on those voyages. And the support of science and so-called discovery was critical. And I would like to not exclude things like science from the discussion about the revolution, and that's just one thing. I think there are all these ways in which we can find links. And so perspective is not just there's disciplinary perspective, perhaps, and subject matter perspective. And then there's, the perspective of individual groups existing now who want stories told, I guess.
Yeah, and to Kathy's point too, I wonder if there's something along the lines of a complicated changing geography, because it's an evolutionary thing even within the weeks that the Declaration is being written and being sent, overseas. I wonder if there's an expansion, not an expansion piece, but a piece here that has something to do with the changing nature of what physically becomes the United States.
This is Fiona. I wonder if we could include something that gestures towards where we're going to put all of this stuff and the resources. There's just such a tremendous amount of effort and energy that's going into the planning and the organizing, and it's not all going to just come to an end right after the celebration and reflection and commemoration is over. And how are we going to capture all of that? So I don't know if there's going to be a resource tab that's attached somewhere. I would like something included about where all the resources are going to go, and the afterlife of this. And if we could think about the afterlife of this and then add something that can capture the moment and the resources and all of the effort and energy that's going into this.
Anyone else?
So Fiona, to answer your question, there is a page within the commission website with some current resources that we can continue to update. I know that there has been some talk of any curriculum-based resources being shared via Connecticut Humanities Teach It. And there are also some conversations around using red, white, and blue schools to share any civics resources at least, and then continuing to think across the board about how those resources are shared in a place where teachers can easily access something that they can trust and know that it's from reliable sources and things like that.
Thank you for clarifying.
I'm getting a sense that these are more than just minor changes. So that I think what we'll have to do is look, Bilal and I will look at these. I've written these comments down. We'll look at them and send you out another. Cindy, when do we need this by? Should we send it out by email or wait till the next meeting? What's your wisdom on that?
I think working via email might be helpful so that the next time we get together, we have a document that people have some consensus around. And we can get this, once Steve, you and Bilal make some edits, we can get this into a Google Doc that we can share with everybody for comment. And we can have those comments kind of ready before the next meeting.
Oh, that's the plan. If you look at this again and have changes that you'd like to make or alterations, just email Bilal, Cindy, or myself, or all of us probably, and we'll make the changes. Matt, would you be willing to just, you talked about the fourth day. Could you just, in relatively briefly, but not incredibly briefly, if you could just tell us about your efforts and Tony's efforts at CCSS and Jenny's efforts at CCSS with the your upcoming conference?
Sure. First thing, it's great. We've got all the money in place that we need to do. We've got the spaces reserved. We've got the organizations that we want to work with, which is great. We are reworking. I sent everybody a draft. That draft was primarily to get some ideas down on paper. We knew that it was going to potentially change significantly. The structure of the conference is still the same, meaning that it's going to be 2 days with teachers and their students. It's going to be 1 day with the commission and with historical and humanities and community and historical society and museum partners. And then the fourth day is going to be ASH. The main thing that we're working on right now is, what do those 2 days of the conference with the students look like? And Steve and Tony and Jenny and I had, I think, a really good conversation last Thursday in which we were trying to, I think the main thing that we were really sort of debating and talking about was the degree to which we wanted to place an emphasis on providing the students with a lot of good historical content versus how much do we want this to be a really big student engagement, student-led kind of experience. And I think some of us were coming at it from different positions. And I think as I've continued to think about it over the last few days and started to rework the plan, I think we're going to come to a really nice middle ground on that, where we're providing the students with some great content and some really important things to think about, but also in the professional development preparation that we do with the teachers prior to the conference. We'll be doing 2 of those PD days that we really focus on asking some really good, substantial, ranging questions about what the kids think that they're learning. What is the most important thing? What do they think the concept of freedom is? How do they apply it based on what they've learned from these various sessions to their understanding today? And I think one of the really interesting things that one of my friends who's a social study coordinator down in Westport, Lauren Francesi, she's on the CCSS board. I had a long talk with her the other day, and she's like, what if we ask the students to give us some commentary, and especially a written piece, like a final project for all the kids. We're only talking about 2-3 pages, and we're still playing with this. And ask them, what do they think their teachers should be informing them about once 2026 rolls around? So basically, we can ask the students, what do they think, that based on the things they've learned and what they're seeing in society today, with all of these different voices, what do they think teachers should emphasize for future students? Which I think is kind of an interesting idea, especially if we've had 2 full days to engage the students with good content and have really, really robust student talks with the students, and have different breakout sessions with the students where they're able to meet in smaller groups and have conversations. And then we pull them all back together at the end of each day and have representatives from those breakout sessions report on what the individual groups had to say. So that's sort of the direction that we're going, and we're still working it out.
Tony, what's your angle? What would you like to see out of this conference? As one of the, Tony is from Connecticut Council for the Social Studies. Tony, what would you like to see come out of this conference?
Well, thank you for asking. I think that it's important that students are able to have a hands-on and minds-on experience where their voices are heard. I think if you call a conference declaring freedom, there probably should be some sort of opportunity for kids to speak out and to share. So one thing that we're working with is we're working on contracting with someone that used to run the Connecticut Youth Forum several years ago. Was a program where basically it was run by the Connecticut Forum, and students would come together from all different schools, and they would talk about really important issues, and their voices would be heard, and it would be in a forum type setting. So that's kind of the starting point of kind of like what the end goal would be for the day. But I would say, where we can hear students' voices. So it's not just their vessels to be filled, but they have knowledge to share. So that's kind of what my angle is.
And Matt, you had spoken, just to review quickly, you had spoken about this the first 2 days. Allison and you were talking about the 4th day. What's the 3rd day?
3rd day is primarily going to be, we're going to ask, I'm working with Jason Mancini from Connecticut Humanities and Denise Merrill, who is that they are the co-chairs, as we know, of the commission. I'm going to work with them specifically on that agenda, but Denise is reaching out to Governor Lamont's office to invite him to be the keynote for that. And one of our primary goals for that day is to really get people meaning not so much the public, but the commission, all of our various, partners, the overall humanities and history community, but especially state government entities, people in the General Assembly, to come together, and the Department of Tourism, right? To come together so that they come to recognize that, wow, Connecticut's got its act together, and this is a really important event. And here's an opportunity, Connecticut marketing, the Department of Tourism, and this is rather ironic, right? For a long time, Connecticut's motto was still revolutionary. They just got rid of it, and I think the new one is make it in Connecticut, or make it here. And so we want them to be a partner with us on all of this. I had a really good conversation with Rob Krebs at Connecticut Historical Society, which is now Connecticut, Center for Culture and History and Culture. And he was talking about exactly that point, that there are a number of entities in the state that are trying to get tourism to work more effectively and interactively with our various humanities and history partners. So that's, I think, a big, really important part of this. And both Rob and Jason are really working on legislators to try and get them to provide some very, very significant funding for this America 250 effort. Thus far, there has been no money that's been provided for it. And when I did the Civil War commemoration, the state never provided any money for that. We always had to go out and find our own money, and we were very, very fortunate to have partners like Travelers. But so we want to try and get legislators to literally come to that third day so they see the importance of this, and maybe it helps with that funding angle. We also would like to invite corporate funders to that day, foundations, and say to them, listen, you should support this. This is good for Connecticut. This is potentially good for Connecticut tourism. It's good for history in the state. And one needle, I don't know if any of you have ever looked at the Massachusetts 250th website. And it's not that there's tremendous amounts of information about all the things they're going to do yet, but they've got a lot of corporate partners that are listed there. And I think that that's worth letting our corporate partners in Connecticut know, hey, why did the corporate founders or corporate partners in Massachusetts and Boston, why are they already kicking money into this and Connecticut's not there yet? So that's sort of the focus of the third day.
I have a question. If that focus of that day is to really show that Connecticut has everything all together, does that mean that the commission and all of the committees should have particular goals they're driving toward for that date so that we have things that we can show that prove we have it all together?
I think that's something that we really need to talk to Jason and Denise. I'm going to be working with them on what their specific goals are. I'm not on I'm a member of this subcommittee. I'm not on the commission, right? So on the sort of larger commission. So that I think that decision, Sally, that's a good question, but I think that decision has to be driven by Denise and Jason and you and Steve, those who are members of the commission.
Okay, that makes sense. I think that's important to know because it's as if the conference is telling us we need to have that done by then.
Oh, I'm not.
So I think there's that. I think we would show it would benefit us to show that we are all of the things that you're saying we want to be by that date.
Okay.
I think also that it's really important. I mean, I think the whole big project is really about democracy too, and the state of democracy, which is, to me, is tied closely with civic engagement. So I think it is one thing to say to kids, what do you want to be taught in class, but by teachers, but I want to know what students are doing to uphold democracy. How are they engaged in the community? What can we encourage students to do to show what democracy means to them? It seems like that's an important. I mean, I want to hear their voices, and that's one way to have them tell teachers what to teach them. But what messages do they have for the state? And for supporting democracy.
Kathy and Allison.
Thanks. Tracy, I love that idea. And just occurs to me, I wonder, and I don't know if there'd be room at the CCSU conference or even if this would be possible, but like it would be kind of cool to have students participate in a public hearing. And I don't know if there's a committee from the legislature that would agree to have its public hearing like during the conference or something. But I was just thinking about like the witchcraft exoneration public hearing. There were 2 kids that testified and they did research and they were awesome. And we could even encourage some teachers to take kids to public hearings and, film them or write about the experience.
By the way, a fascinating discussion in what scholars want people to know about the revolution was the discussion of whether the people involved, and I don't want to get political here, but the people involved in January 6th could rightfully invoke the American Revolution as a justification for what they were doing. Sally, what was the outcome of that, by the way, that discussion? And then Matt, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't really know that there was an outcome to that, but I have it in my notes.
But isn't that an interesting, that to me, or to many in the room, that was a fascinating part of the discussion. Allison and then Matt again.
I feel like one of my students. I was just playing with my pen, Steve.
Oh, okay.
But thanks.
Matt.
First, Tracy, I completely and totally agree with you. That concept and that question is embedded into, I think, everything that we want to do. And when we say, what do we want our teachers to teach us? I think we're going to get some of that in there about what is democracy today. I think it's integral to this entire venture. In terms of the January 6th thing, that is one of the sub topics for the second day that I'm very, very interested in, is exactly that. Are these the patriots of old? How do we think about January 6th? What arguments can you make for that? I think that's January 6th is the greatest challenge to democracy and the existence of this government since the Civil War.
Kathy, could you just tell us what's Connecticut Explored planning around 250, just so we know where that's coming from?
Okay, so we have a Connecticut Humanities Planning Grant for a simulation. I may have talked about this already, I think I have, but the simulation follows, in a sense, the Connecticut line, or at least the Connecticut line is the like the timeline, right? And this would be a game that users could play where they assume a character. We have 6 characters: a spy, a soldier, and a doctor. And then for the male characters, and 3 female characters: a farm wife, a laundress, and a shopkeeper. And the players will interact with major figures of the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, all of these kinds of things. And what we hope to do is connect our museums and historical societies and libraries by using what they have in their archives and object collections to illustrate the game. And of course, we'll be publishing articles in the magazine about the subject. We haven't exactly nailed down, like what articles, or whether we're going to have one issue that's entirely themed around, 1776. But we will definitely have articles in the magazine, and that simulation, I think, will be a big thing that we will roll out next year, at least one segment of it. And then we hope to apply for an implementation grant so we can actually follow the entire war. We're not just limiting it to 1776.
I think we'll end up, you know what? I think we're going to end up with 3 or 4 subcommittees that we'll share. But could I ask those of you that have experience in college world, Matt, Kathy, both Matts, and anyone else, Bilal, what should we do, or what could we do for college students? Because our mission doesn't stop at grade 12. Any idea how to get college students engaged in this? If at all.
Assign them papers. I think that the approach is actually very, very similar to what we're trying to do with the high school students. We want to do the same thing with them that Tracy just asked about, and that is let's understand how they go about defining democracy today. And I try and interject these kind of ideas all the time today when I'm talking about different generational responses to events in US and in world history. I think, contemporarily, when you look at what the Parkland students did after they finally came to the realization that the quote unquote adults in the nation and in the government aren't going to do anything about their students being hunted on a daily basis. And they went out and they engaged in democracy, right? Because of public and school shootings. I think BLM is an outgrowth of that as well, but that's democracy in action and their conceptions of freedom and what is right and concepts of protest. So I think there's so many different directions that we can go in with all of this.
Bilal, do you have any thoughts on this? What would you think how could we address college students on this?
Yeah, I was actually just trying to listen and hear what others were saying, but I'll add. But I know Kathy raised her hand, so maybe.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kathy. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. I wasn't in a hurry. Well, thank you, Bilal. So at CCSU for a while we were doing these reacting to the past games, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with reacting to the past. Could you kind of signal if you are?
I am.
Okay. These are games where students assume roles and they get involved in the primary documents. They play a character. It's not competitive, but you do get points. And of course, sometimes the outcome is not in the game is not the same as it really was in the actual past. And then there's like a debriefing period where you learn about, well, what really did happen. And I think that these are very effective teaching tools. But the game takes some time to learn. It takes a certain amount of coaching. And I think it would be interesting to try to help colleges put on these courses in their US surveys, in their, part 1 US surveys, in the community colleges and in the state universities. Most students who do these courses remember far more from these courses than they do from a lecture course. At the same time, it is sometimes difficult to get professors to commit to the time to, take 3 weeks out of a survey course and teach it in that manner. But I wonder if there aren't, I think one of our goals should be to make teaching about the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence, and in the future, the Constitution, more active as opposed to passive learning. That's what I would like to see.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the reacting to. I had a colleague of mine in the past who really loved doing the simulations and the students, and you're absolutely right, to get a lot out of it. It strikes me that at least in two potential places, U.S. history courses and also American national government courses could be sort of places to have some sort of intervention happening that's built theme-wise around this. I know, every year we have a constitutional day that is mandatorily recognized, and I know Jill Daliotta at UHARD will do some activities on that day. But I think generating some ideas about how to weave this, at least again in those two spaces, in particular in terms of the kind of courses that are offered. But I think it's an interesting question because we don't have sort of the kind of top-down sort of design of how we teach, for example, American national government. I teach it one way, which centers race and gender and ethnicity and lots of other issues. And not everybody does that. I have a textbook that does that specifically. So I'm doing some of the kinds of things we're talking about we'd like to see done, in the classroom around this. And I do this in how I teach about American government, and particularly when I talk about the Constitution and the American Revolution and the framers of the Constitution in general. So yeah, so it's a good question, Steve, in terms of what, makes sense at that level. And I think Kathy's idea about reacting to the past, I think, is a great sort of vehicle for doing some of that, but getting the buy-in, I think, will be challenging given the time commitment. And I know my colleague Chris, who did it, he went to reacting to the past. They would have conferences where people would come together to talk about how to exactly do this. And I think that is a level of commitment that goes, beyond the norm.
Yeah,
This is your world too. What do you got? Anything on this?
Well, I think the point around having active learning and engaged learning, I think, is going to be key to this. So I think reacting to the past is a great example. I think weaving in different forms of dialogue and deliberation, providing discussion guides and trainings to faculty that don't require 3 weeks worth of time. I think so. So I think part of this is building a matrix of, kind of shallow to deep, and also disciplinary to interdisciplinary spaces as well. So I think we should be strategizing about how do issues of democracy look in biology classes and not just in government. I think if we're looking at government and some of the kind of traditional disciplinary spaces, that's great. And those students are going to be engaged, but they're also asking those questions to begin with most often. And I think part of the opportunity we have here is to really embed this across to allow every member of a campus community to kind of look at it. So I think there's opportunities in student life too, that I think, especially for residential campuses, that are going to be different than community campuses or community colleges. But I do think there's lots of potentially sponsoring organizations that can really wrestle with what is the mission of that unit and how does it connect with issues of democracy. And I think we can help people both think about and reflect and plan on that and give them some resources, curricular guides, discussion guides, et cetera, that can really, and training to help them do that. So I think the sky's the limit. It's just a matter of what's the resources and what's realistic. That's different than, I think, additionally, having an action civics component for the collegiate level. Like, I know we used to run a conference in Connecticut when I was just running our Connecticut affiliate for Campus Compact. Now we're really just a national organization. We don't have a Connecticut conference anymore, but, is there an opportunity to kind of create some unique spaces to some of that work as well, that could allow college students to have their own voice and agency and potentially kind of, do things like go into the State House and having those experiences that we used to run a fair amount that on different campuses. So I think there's a ton there. I think it'd be worth creating some documentation where we can brainstorm in. I know sometimes these meetings, we got to cover a lot of things in a short period of time, but would be happy to work with some folks on that.
Down to another level briefly, and I'd ask our colleagues from Stepping Stones and from K-12 world, what would you think we could do for our youngest learners? Because we want our K1, 2, what can we do for them? How do we get them engaged in this?
So at Stepping Stones, back in 2020, we launched an event called KC 2020, and we followed up on that with KC 2022. That was a kids convention. And basically the idea was to try to scaffold the information to help children have a choice and a voice in the world and have them speak to the opportunities and speak to the things that interest them the most. As far as it relates to going and talking about America 250, we are planning a KC 2025 event, which will be centered around these types of topics here, talking about America, talking about the America that what they perceive America is right now, but also about the types of things that they want to see in the world. It's very difficult because some of these things are, some of the issues that we are addressing here are very complex, and so you want to be able to make sure that you're really talking about this through a kid's perspective, but at the same time, it's amazing when you give children the opportunity to speak on what they see and what they feel, because they have very, very strong, big opinions about things. It's amazing when you also have the opportunity to connect children from different communities together in that one type of conversation, because you open up perspectives for these children as well. Sometimes they get to understand and see the world differently because they hear from a child who has a totally different experience from them. And especially in this melting pot of Connecticut, where we have such a diversity, and that diversity is socioeconomic as well as, as well as the type of diversity, of race, color, religion, et cetera. Here in this area, we have the opportunity to bring together a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, where that may not be the case in many parts of the United States.
Sally, you work in, thank you, thanks, Robert. Sally, you work with some of these younger students in your setting. What would you do with the earliest learners?
Well, I was really taken by what Robert just said. That is so true. We have just finished reviewing all of the nominees from several different states for Connecticut's Kid Governor. And when you open up an opportunity for students to have a voice, it is astounding what they say, and important that they're listened to. So I just think that whatever we're doing for the younger students, it gives them an opportunity to learn some of the concepts of democracy and really kind of talk about it and wrestle with it at their level. I think they could come up with some really fascinating takes on the world and how they're seeing it. I'm always surprised with the fifth graders in Kid Governor by what they're thinking about and how they're thinking about it. And so I think that if we give some of the questions that adults are looking at, that will be useful too, even for younger kids. And I just remembered something else from that conference. There were scholars on the panel saying, use primary resources. You don't have to say to the students, this happened and this was good, this happened and this was bad. You open up the documents and let them look at it. And it was really interesting to hear a teacher say, pretty much primary documents are just too hard. And a 60-year-old can be like a fourth grader, and you can't just go throwing primary documents at people. So it made me think about how we need to do a better job of teaching people about the tools of history and how important they can be. And I've always found with young kids, if you give them primary documents, they will understand them and they will come up with really great takes on them. So I think just opening those doors to voice and action at every grade level is really critical.
Can I just something on that side? I was scanning through the Massachusetts website and looking at the Connecticut website. Needs a lot of work, visually. It's really bad. But I mean, I really love that they had primary documents on their site under their resources, and the site we have is much different. And I think one contribution of this committee is to collect that so that people, I mean, Connecticut has a rich history tied obviously to the founding of the country and, those original documents, things about our towns. I mean, those things should be resources that students who might be working on a 250 paper about their city, for example, should be able to find some of those things, and be able to look at them and, and have a sense of the history of their community, where they grew up at, the town that they live in, and the rest of the state. And that website we have now doesn't give that kind of a window, but I think that's something we should be building toward.
That is such an important point, and it just reminded me of something that when I worked in Lebanon, I did a program using primary documents with kids in a summer camp. What better for a summer camp than to be looking at primary documents, right? Who wants to swim? But these kids looked at the Lebanon soldiers. I got pension records and had direct quotes from them about their experiences. And at the end of it, one of the kids, I think a fourth grader, we talked about what we had learned, and she said, well, I learned that, I learned in school that Bunker Hill was really important in the American Revolution, but now I know that people who walk the same streets I walk fought at Bunker Hill and were part of Bunker Hill. And she felt very proud of that, and she felt a feeling that probably a lot of people in Connecticut don't feel, that they were part of this movement in some way. And I think, you know, it's not about the war, but once you open that door to helping people imagine people of their own town in a situation, it opens the door to a lot of other things and really helps them place themselves in the story of democracy and history and all of that. So I think those access to those documents and the tools for using them are really important.
They really turned down swimming to look at primary source documents. You had to be damn convincing, Sally, I'll tell you.
I can be very convincing, Steve.
Hey,
I think
the
Robert's
last,
going to say something. I think he went off mic, Robert.
Robert, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say as well, one of the things is hitting on that pride element as well is giving children the opportunity to learn more about their state does give children that sense of pride about the area. So for instance, here at Stepping Stones, we're in the shadow of the Yankee Doodle Bridge. And so explaining to children the whole story behind Yankee Doodle, it was something that is a basic song that most children sing, and it gave them a completely different context and a completely different thought process about why we sing certain songs, we do certain things. And so, you know, we talk about really young, young children. You know, we do have to lean into the fact that there's a lot that happened here in Connecticut over the years. A lot of that history even predates, 1776. But it helps them get context as to where they live and what happened here. And when they drive past a town line sign that says a date, like I live in Milford, so Milford 1639, children have a different understanding of what that means, and there's a pride and living in a place where there is so much history here, and maybe opening up their eyes to say, let me look into more of this history and find out more things. A lot of times we spark interest through the things that we say and do with the concepts like this.
Last question I've got is, and I'll start with you, Cindy, on this one, if you don't mind. This was a subtopic sort of the thing in Williamsburg. There will be people, when we put out curriculum materials, say that talking about looking at the Revolutionary War or the Declaration or something from an indigenous lens, or for an African American lens, there will be Connecticut residents who would be outraged at that. So my question, Cindy, and anyone else, should that be, because by the way, my lens is always, I work here at the State Department of Ed, so that's always a concern. Is that a concern for what we do, or do we put out what we think the best scholarship and the best information is?
I will speak from what I've heard the commissioners say and Denise and Jason say, and I think what's most important is sharing the best resources that we can and letting people make up their own minds based on the best information that we have. I don't think we should be shying away from difficult topics and difficult interpretations. I think we are not in a state or in a position where we have to celebrate the 250th first and foremost. I think we have some flexibility. And I don't think anybody has been opposed to that in any of our conversations. I think this is a complicated history, but one that we want to work with the public to give them the skills they need to tackle those complexities and understand and discuss it among their peers. I hope that makes sense.
We're good with everybody. We're good. That's sort of our marching orders. Okay. Not that Cindy gives marching orders, but that's the perspective that I would, and we're all good with that. No discussion needed. I don't think. No. Yes, Sally.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, because when I was going through my notes from the conference, this came up again and again. It comes up on tours here and in all kinds of places. The number of adults and children who learn something new that they didn't know before, like looking at something through a lens other than their own. The number of people who say, why wasn't I taught that? And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that people want to know things and they feel cheated when they find out that they were not told a complete story of our past, or close to complete. So I just think that's something to bear in mind.
And I'll also add that one of the things that came out of those listening sessions that we did in the spring was a request from people to share as true of a history as possible. And people were really asking for the historical resources and the background needed to tackle difficult subjects without shying away from it. So I think that's something that we've heard at multiple different levels at this point.
Thank you, Cindy. So I think anyone else, by the way, what our mission is, what Bilal and my mission is, we'll go over the statement again. We'll write that, we'll correct it, and we'll send it out to you via email. Yeah, Bilal.
Do you think, Steve, it makes sense at this stage to ask all of us as members of the committee to begin that sort of process of thinking about and collecting some of the kinds of things that we think we should be trying to share and create in terms of generating resources? And so, imagine our historical societies know where a lot of these sort of original documents are at. Are there things in our state that we have? I see some of it is on the website for the 250 that's there, but should we be also thinking about how to collect those things and begin to share some of that so that we're generating the product that we ultimately will want to? If there is educational curriculum sort of ideas you think are really interesting from K through 12 to higher ed, to begin to collect those things, to share and to compile them in some way that we can sort of begin to look at them. And I guess the second question is, and this may be a Cindy, I'm sort of wondering, like, is this going to be placed on the website as like the education committee space on the, I mean, how does this sort of migrate? And I guess someone asked that question earlier about where does this go and how does it get to the public in a sort of internet sort of space, I guess, is the first sort of question.
Yeah. So from a working perspective, we do have a workspace within Google that I can give subcommittee members access to, and that can be somewhere where in the background before we're ready to share it with the public, we can work in there. When we're ready to share it with the public, I think there are a few different options. There's always creating a new page within the commission website, which we're hoping to overhaul. I know it's not attractive, but it is what we have right now. It's free. So we can easily create a website, a page within the website and keep it all there. We can also, there is a database that is a prototype of that we're looking to share with the public, so that people can go in there and search for a topic or search for a town and find information related to that. So that's another place where we can take resources and make them easy for people to access. It's not pretty, and it's not comprehensive yet, but we're hoping that over the course of the next few months, we'll work with partner organizations to fill it out. So we have both of those options, and I'll throw the link for the database into the chat as well.
Yeah, and I was asking that question. I don't know, Steve, you think I'm jumping too far ahead, or whether
Great. No, and okay, could you reiterate your call for, it was great. What should we all be starting to do? You were on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, I was just saying, I mean, there are folks already, Historical Society, I mean, lots of places, you guys know a lot of resources, but to begin to sort of compile somewhere to share and to create just among the committee, what are the things we'd like to get out there to the community? So, I mean, I really love what they've done with the Massachusetts sites. They've got digital exhibitions, they've got images and maps, they've got, you know, websites, podcasts and blogs, newspaper collections, digitized, published, manuscript records. I mean, I imagine these are all things we have here in Connecticut as well that, you know, could be those primary sources that people will be able to use. So if a teacher wants to, you know, find somewhere with a local map of the town their school is in, and it's something about that history, I imagine that's been collected and done, at least at the local level, I would imagine, by some historical society or some group, you know, in the state. So just for us to begin to think about what are the kind of things just to move us, because it'll be 2026 before we know it.
And just again, not to be defensive of anybody, but just remember that that Denise is actively trying to get money in various ways to support our efforts, which have not happened yet, but she's very confident that they will. Is that a safe statement, Cindy?
Yeah, we're doing our best. Right now, it's just me.
So
you're the only one writing the checks, Cindy? Is that what you mean?
Oh, I wish. No, it's half my job, and it's enough time that it's almost a volunteer job.
So how about this, folks? You'll get an email within 2 weeks with the revised statement, which we'd ask you to approve, or if you still have more comments, put it. We're also creating, rather than us meeting as a large group like this all the time, we're also going to create some subcommittees, and we'll send that information out, and you'll be asked to join one of the subcommittees. And the subcommittees could be perhaps, you know, college, you know, working with historical societies, young learners. So we'll have subcommittees on those topics, and Bilal and I'll sit down and solidify what those will be. And I think if it's all right with you folks, we'll send out a doodle poll on this, but we want to meet probably in that period between, I know it's busy, but early in the period between Thanksgiving and Christmas. We want to have one more meeting this year, and it'll be in that period, but we'll send out a doodle poll for the best time on it. Yeah, Matt.
Just one last thing. If you haven't had a chance to look at the draft proposal of the conference for March, and in particular, the varying breakout sessions that we're suggesting, please just take a few minutes to look at that and consider additional ideas or even speakers that we could potentially utilize for that, because we really want to be able to provide, you know, some really thought-provoking kinds of things.
Matt, I'm not sure if everyone has received that. I'm not sure if it got around to everybody on the subcommittee. So if you want to send me the document, I'm happy to copy you and make sure that every single person's on there.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have anything for the good of the order? Thanks for attending, folks. Greatly appreciate it. And to be continued. And again, you'll get something from us in a week or two. So have a good evening.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.